Today we're going to talk about how you go from working out of your family's garage to literally changing the world. What if we told you there's a secret principle Steve Jobs used to find success? It's a principle you can apply to your own life to boost your productivity and jumpstart your personal growth. What is it? Keep tuning in to find out. For now, let's take it back to 1955. It was a historic year. Disneyland had opened its gates for the first time in California. The polio vaccine had just been approved. The civil rights movement started to gain national attention. And in San Francisco, a graduate student from Germany made the difficult decision to give up her infant son for adoption after the father of the child refused to marry her. The boy was set to live with a family, but they changed their minds at the last minute. They wanted a girl instead. Luckily, Paul and Clara Jobs, a lower middle-class couple from Mountain View, California, took the child in and named him Stephen. Little did they know their adopted son would shape how we use technology forever. From a young age, Steve Jobs was exactly what you'd expect a future entrepreneur to be: curious, creative, and inquisitive. Though they didn't have much, his family gave Steve something more valuable than money. They fostered his love for all things technology. His father was a machinist who fixed broken cars and sold them for profit. Steve was eager to learn, spending long hours with his dad in the family garage, where they took apart and reconstructed electronics together. This early encouragement to experiment sparked a lifelong commitment to innovation and education. School was another story. Like many young geniuses, Steve found formal education boring. He was more interested in pulling elaborate pranks than sitting through science classes whose lessons he'd already applied in his garage. In fact, his test scores were so high that administrators wanted him to skip half of elementary school and go straight to high school. His parents declined the offer. Outside of school, Steve created his own opportunities. When he was 12, he called HP founder Bill Hewlett himself to ask for electronic parts for a project. This impressed Hewlett so much that he offered Jobs a summer internship. The experience opened doors the working-class Steve wouldn't have had access to otherwise. It's also where he met 18-year-old programmer Steve Wozniak, his future partner in founding Apple. But first, like most people wanting to shoot up the economic ladder, Steve decided to go to college. He enrolled in Reed College in Portland, but there too he was frustrated, and money became an issue. His parents had pulled together their entire savings for his tuition, but still it wasn't enough. When Steve realized the tough financial situation he put his family in, he dropped out after his first semester. As it turns out, being a college dropout put him in good company. We bet you've probably heard of a few other famous college dropouts with successful tech careers. Here's just a few. Billionaire Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of Harvard after 3 years to focus on building Facebook full-time. Bill Gates lasted only 2 years at the same Ivy before moving on to found Microsoft. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey even dropped out of college twice. Co-founder of Uber, Travis Kalanick, never got his bachelor's degree either. And Apple executive Steve Wozniak? He quit college a couple of semesters shy of graduating, but then went back to finish out his senior year a decade later, after he'd made more than enough money to pay for tuition. But what about Steve? He didn't drop out because he had $1 million idea. He barely had 2 nickels to rub together. With no place to go and no money, he would sleep on the floor of his friend's room while he figured out his next moves. Luckily, he got a job as a video game designer at Atari, but he quit a few months later to take a pilgrimage to India. His experiences seeking enlightenment would shape his mindset for years to come. But then, like a lot of young adults without a solid career, Steve moved back home. It was there that he reconnected with Steve Wozniak. The two bonded over their mutual love of computers and their conviction that they could make them even better, smaller, cheaper, and more accessible for average people like Steve's working-class parents. Initially, they funded their entrepreneurial venture by selling Jobs' beloved Volkswagen bus and Wozniak's scientific calculator. The sales netted them $1,350, and in 1976, Apple Computer opened its first headquarters, right inside Jobs' family garage. The duo worked for hours on innovative digital chips, a relative unknown at the time. Steve Jobs had always lived in the future. He explained his philosophy like this. There's an old Wayne Gretzky quote that I love. I skate to where the puck is going to be, not where it has been. We've always tried to do that at Apple since the very beginning, and we always will. The first major product they created was the Blue Box, a digital device for making long-distance calls for free. Its success became their motivation to pitch to big tech companies with their inventions. This led to the birth of the first ever Apple machine. How much of Steve Jobs' story did you already know? Have you ever had to make sacrifices for your own business or dreams? Let us know down in the comments. After Jobs created a couple products, now came the real hard part, getting funding. He chased investors until finally Intel agreed to fund his company. Their first computer made around $774,000. After 3 years of Apple's second model, the Apple II, the company's sales increased by 700% to $139 million. Jobs was worth $1 million when he was 23, $10 million at 24, and crossed $100 million by the time he was 25. In 1980, the product became a publicly traded company with a value of $1.2 billion. By the end of the first day of trading, Jobs brought on Pepsi-Cola's marketing expert to serve as CEO. Sales were up, business was booming. Until it wasn't. Despite early success, Apple had difficulty competing with the PC-dominated market. Despite Jobs' many innovative triumphs at Apple, tensions grew between him and the executive board. He was edged out into a marginal position and ultimately left the company in 1985. He wouldn't return for over a decade. It's hard to imagine Apple without Steve Jobs. Have you ever had to rethink your career after some surprising news? Let us know down in the comments. Despite the shocking betrayal, Jobs didn't give up. In 1986, Steve purchased an animation company from George Lucas. That brand was Pixar. The studio that brought us classics like Toy Story, Up, and Monsters, Inc. Jobs had invested $50 million of his own money into the company. He then went on to establish a new hardware and software company, Next, but the brand floundered due to the high prices of the machines. Still, it was sold to Apple nearly a decade later for $429 million. But it wasn't a purchase Apple could really afford. The company had lost $1.04 billion in 1997. Sales plummeted by 30% in the last quarter of 1996. The production line was a mess, producing random bits of hardware and computers. They had 350 products, but none were really selling. When Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, his task of righting the ship seemed almost impossible. So, how did he do it? If you've made it this far, be sure to like and subscribe. You're going to love our profiles of celebrities and business icons. And you're going to want to stick around now when we reveal the best kept secrets and life lessons you can apply to your own journey today. Okay, now back to our story. So how exactly did Steve Jobs turn Apple around? After a few weeks of sitting in on product review sessions, Jobs knew he needed to change tactics drastically. The market was flooded with PCs. In order to compete with them, Apple would have to think different. At a product meeting, he decided to reduce the number of products by 70%. Apple would go back to basics and produce only 4 products. His vision was met with disbelief, shock, and then production started. In the words of John Sculley, former Apple CEO, what makes Steve's methodology different from everybody else's is that he always believed that the most important decisions you make are not the things that you do, but the things that you decide not to do. But by getting Apple to focus on just 4 computers, he saved the company. Deciding what not to do is as important as deciding what to do. It's true for companies and it's true for products. Steve passed this advice on to just about everyone. He encouraged everyone to relentlessly filter out distractions and focus on doing just a few things well. Apple's move to a smaller product line and a greater focus on quality and innovation paid off. 1 year later, the company turned in a $309 million profit. Each year has been more profitable than the last. Now, Apple makes hundreds of billions annually. So, what's his top secret to success? You've probably guessed it. Focus on perfection and expertise in just a few areas. There's a name for this guiding philosophy. It's called the Pareto Principle. The Pareto Principle was first conceived by economist Vilfredo Pareto. He states that 80% of our results can be attributed to just 20% of our actions. This 80-20 distribution has been applied to a number of different industries and activities. You might notice, for instance, that 80% of your company's profits come from 20% of your clients, or spending time working on 20% of your projects yields 80% of your income. Steve Jobs applied this principle ruthlessly, cutting away anything that slashed into his margins. But Jobs didn't only seek to simplify his products, but also the work it took to make them. The way you get programmer productivity is not by increasing the lines of code per programmer per day, he said. That doesn't work. The way you get programmer productivity is by eliminating lines of code you have to write. The line of code that's the fastest to write, that never breaks, that doesn't need maintenance, is the line you never had to write. When you know where to focus your time and energy, you can boost your productivity while actually doing less work. It becomes a matter of working strategically and thinking differently. After all, it's often the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently, who push the human race forward. Because the ones who are crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones who do. We hope you've learned something from Steve Jobs' journey from near poverty to pioneer. Remember, never lose focus. Do you agree or disagree that we got Steve Jobs' top life lessons right? Would you add others? And make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more rags to riches stories and personal lessons from your favorite celebrities and entrepreneurs. We put out new stories frequently, so stay tuned for more inspiring content you can apply to your own life. See you next time, Rags to Riches TV fans.